Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms, because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NVG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to A Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. We're going to have a good show today. I've got a real interesting guest that's going to come on to talk about his book and a few other things that may not be in the book, but is related to the topic he's going to discuss. So I think you're going to have fun listening to this guest. And then you might get a little hot mic action today, because, you know, as I stated before, this podcast was set up for my therapy. It was created to give me the ability to vent and to discuss some things that are going on. So I think I'm going to give you a little bit of that today as well. But I do want to address something that is sad, in that there has been a major hurricane that hit the United States. Hurricane Helene, I think is, instead of Helen, it's Helene. And at least 200 people have died because of this hurricane. It hit Florida first and did incredible damage on the land, which is really, really unusual. The storm itself, the actual storm itself, was 500 miles wide. That's a lot of territory. And so it hit Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas really hard before it weakened. And it seems like a lot of damage happened in North Carolina. So, as always, whenever we have a situation where we're trying to get people to help out, I encourage people to go to FEMA.gov. And FEMA.gov has a list of organizations that you can donate to, or to sign up to volunteer. And my experience dealing with Katrina as a civilian, not as a legislator, was that I didn't go to the coast until a month after the storm hit. And at that point, it was pretty much organized. It was still a mess. I mean, and I've told this story many times. I don't know how many times I've told it on the podcast, but it was a mess. It was like you would have thought that they never had asphalt paved roads there. It was all dirt. And we had to go to a park and it looked like a military base. And it was like they were giving, it didn't matter whether you were a volunteer or somebody in the community, they were giving you water in a can, right? And food and all that kind of stuff. And the group I was with was helping to provide assistance for people, whether, like housing, trying to, get them on a list, or, we were going to people's houses to like take mold off of the walls and move furniture and all that kind of stuff. And we did that literally like a month after the storm had gone through. So if you are not a certified law enforcement professional, if you are not an EMT, if you are not a combat medic trained, excuse me, don't go down there. Don't go to those affected areas just yet. One, they're really not ready to handle all the people coming, and two, let the professional people do the heavy lifting and make it so that it's safe for you to get down there and help out. If it's family or whatever, you do what you got to do for your family. But just an average, ordinary person who wants to help, I would wait. I wouldn't try to get down there right away. And that was one of the issues, where I know we're in the middle of a campaign and people try to play political games and all that stuff. But it wasn't a smart move for Donald Trump to go down there. Because not only from a safety standpoint, but from a logistic standpoint, because he is a candidate and he is a former president. And so if you live in a major city and Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Barack Obama has showed up in your town and you were on the interstate, that was not a good experience for you, because precautions are made, right? When I was in Chicago for the convention, there wasn't just highway patrol, right? State troopers on the road. There were military vehicles on those expressways to make sure that it was safe, because the vice president of the United States is a candidate for president, and she was going to be there. So the resources that have to be done just for a visit complicates the efforts needed to deal with the first stage of cleanup. And they're still looking for people. They're still rescuing folks. And then to pull people off to deal with a dignitary of that esteem to come in, that's not really fair to law enforcement. So, the fact that Trump went down there, that's fine. Of course, the vice president and the president had to go down there at that point. But there's a reason why George Bush and Lyndon Johnson and any other president that's dealt with a hurricane of that magnitude flew over the place first before they physically came back on the ground, because they wanted to personally assess the damage, but at the same time, they didn't want to interfere with the operations going on with search and rescue and just making travel possible, right? Making sure that it's safe, power lines, all that stuff, right? So if you're one of those folks saying, well, why wasn't she down there? Just stop. Okay. If you've never been in the middle of that, if you have never experienced that in your state, in your town, just let the professionals handle that and understand when people tell you don't go there, right? The other thing that's going on, and I wanted to share this real quick before we get into the news, is that there's something, a memo came out that basically said that FEMA didn't have any money to deal with this situation. And they were saying, well, it's because they have to take care of all the immigrants. Now, immigration and custom enforcement and FEMA both fall under the Department of Homeland Security. That is true. But these agencies have separate budgets, and they don't dip and dab in order to, it's not like us trying to make sure that we pay our bills and all that stuff, and we got to take money out of this account to put it in to cover some expenses. That's not how that works in the government. Everything is pretty much earmarked. So, FEMA responded to that stuff. And so they've got a whole page called rumors dealing with the hurricane, right? And so it says FEMA does not have enough money to provide disaster assistance for Helene. Fact, FEMA has enough money right now for immediate response and recovery needs. If you are affected by Helene, do not hesitate to apply for disaster assistance, as there is a variety of help available for different needs. And then the other one, the rumor, funding for FEMA disaster response was diverted to support international efforts like Ukraine, like Israel, or border-related issues, immigration. Fact, this is false. No money is being diverted from disaster response needs. FEMA's disaster response efforts and individual assistance is funded through the Disaster Relief Fund, which is a dedicated fund for disaster efforts. Disaster Relief Fund money has not been diverted to other non-disaster related efforts. So as somebody that has been in government at the state level, we don't rob Peter to pay Paul as far as state agencies go. And, it's like the money's divvied up in the appropriations process. And then, if the state has a rainy day fund, they can try to get extra money from that, right? A reserve fund. That's what in Mississippi you call the rainy day fund. But a reserve account, you would try to get the money from that. You wouldn't pull from one agency to finance another agency. That's just not how that works. That definitely does not work in the federal government. And there's no need, because of the amount of money that the federal government generates through taxes. Everything's pretty much divvied up. So, and specifically earmarked. I don't even think the federal government has a quote unquote rainy day fund, but they do print the money. So, I'm just saying. So, I just wanted to get that out there. And, I was hoping maybe to get something else, but, I don't see that. So I'm not going to address that. But I just wanted to get that clarification out of the way, because that's not even what I wanted to hot mic about. So anyway, now that I've gotten that out of the way, if you want to get involved, go to FEMA.gov, find an organization that you want to donate money to. The Red Cross is always a go-to for a lot of people. but FEMA will have a list of funds. And they also will have a list of organizations that are signing up volunteers to go later down to the affected areas. So please pray for those folks and do what you can to help. All right, now that I've done all that, it's time for a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. U.S. prosecutors claimed in a recent court filing that Donald Trump acted beyond his presidential duties by pressuring state officials and Mike Pence to overturn the 2020 election results. A federal jury in Tennessee convicted 3 former Memphis police officers of witness tampering in connection with the beating death of Tyree Nichols. In a civil debate ahead of the November 5th election, vice presidential candidates Tim Walz and J.D. Vance focused their criticism on their party leaders while keeping a cordial tone throughout. A Bloomberg poll shows that Vice President Kamala Harris holds a slim lead over Donald Trump in 6 swing states. Authorities in the southwestern U.S. are managing the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which has claimed at least 200 lives and caused estimated damages of $160 billion after making landfall in Florida as a Category 4 hurricane. Israel conducted a significant airstrike in Beirut that killed Hezbollah leader Syed Hassan Nasrallah, a move seen as a strategic blow to Hezbollah and Iran. Iran retaliated with its largest military assault against Israel, which involved over 180 ballistic missiles. Members of the International Longshoremen's Association on the U.S. East Coast and Gulf of Mexico reached a tentative agreement to avoid a protracted strike. A Georgia judge has temporarily blocked a law banning most abortions after 6 weeks, allowing abortions to resume in the state. The Democratic National Committee has filed a lawsuit against the Georgia Election Board to prevent a hand count of ballots in the upcoming election. The U.S. Department of Justice has sued Alabama over a voter roll program aimed at removing non-citizens. And the U.S. Department of Justice is reviewing the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, aiming to complete their findings by year end. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for my guest, Guy Golan. Guy Golan is the co-author of My Brother's Keeper, The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. And we'll be discussing this book along with some relevant topics in this interview. He is an associate professor at Texas Christian University and the host of the Public Diplomat podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this program, Guy Golan. All right. Guy Golan, professor, how you doing, sir? You doing good?
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have you on. You've written this interesting book, My Brother's Keeper: The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. And I think that's a relevant topic. I have had people on both sides of the issue. I was honored to have one of the general consulates from the state of Israel come on. So this is a subject that I've been dealing with, and it's something that's playing a major role in the elections. So when we made the connection, it made sense to have you on. So I'm honored that you did that. Now, what I normally do with guests is that we start the interview off with a quote. So this is your quote. Israel remained the focus of Jewish hopes. Wherever Jews were, they built synagogues, each of which was a symbolic fragment of the Temple of Jerusalem. Wherever they were, they prayed about Jerusalem, facing Jerusalem. They remembered it and wept for it, as the psalm had said, at every time of joy. They never relinquished their claim to the land, and there were places, especially in the north, from which they never left. The Jewish people was the circumference of a circle, at whose center was the Holy Land, and Jerusalem, the holy city. What does that quote mean to you?
It means a lot. It means everything. A lot of people are wondering about the state of Israel. You know, everybody's talking about Israel. Everybody has an opinion about Israel. There is a narrative out there that is very popular, especially amongst the progressive left these days, that the Jewish people came to Israel from Europe, and they just the British and the French just gave the Jews from Europe this country they had no business to be in, and they stole the lands of the natives away, right? And what are the Jews doing in the state of Israel? And the answer is that the Jewish people never left Israel. The Jewish people have lived in Israel for thousands of years, and archaeology proves this. But more than anything else, the state of Israel could only have been established in the land of Israel, because the people of Israel, that is their home.
Yeah. And that is a narrative that's out there about who settled in, especially after World War II, because that's when the state of Israel, as we know it today, came into existence. So that leads me to the first question, which is something your book seeks to answer. Is Judaism a religion or a nation, or is it both?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Well, the answer is it depends who you ask. And so if you ask people in Israel, the answer is it's both, right? The Jewish people are a people, they are a nation. And with that comes mutual assurance, meaning that every Jew around the world is responsible for one another. That is a central assumption of Israel's version of Judaism. However, when you ask Jews in the diaspora, is Judaism a mere religion, or are you a part of a people? Well, you're going to get different types of answers.
Yeah. Now, from what I understand, you were born in Israel and you moved to the United States, but your children were born here. Now, help explain something to me. From what I understand is that children are determined by the mother, right? As far
the religion of the children?
Yeah, it's like it's something about it's something where the Jewish lineage is determined by the mother as opposed to the father. Am I getting that right?
You are correct. That is correct.
Okay. So you stated that your children are American Jews, but you are an Israeli Jew by birth.
Yes. So basically, our book really looks at the differences between the two large tribes of Jews around the world. So if you look at where Jewish people live these days, about half of the population lives in the United States, and half lives in Israel. And these two Jewish tribes, who are, in my view, one people, have most people think it's the same thing, right? When you ask a typical American, what's the difference between an Israeli Jew and an American Jew, they say it's the same thing, right? But these two groups could not be more different than one another. They have a completely different political psychology, different existence, different culture, different values. So this is really what our book is all about.
Yeah. So, and you kind of discuss it in using the term ambivalence. So what is the main difference between an American Jew and an Israeli Jew? What is what is the key difference? Because I think that kind of addresses what you talked about initially about the perspective of if Israel is a nation or just a religion.
Yeah. Well, the main difference between Israeli Jews and American Jews is the fact that in Israel, Jews are the majority. Jewish people speak their language of Hebrew. They celebrate their national holidays. Their museums celebrate the heritage of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So when you live in Israel as a Jew, you are the majority in your own nation. And that is completely different than American Jews or Jews in any other nation who live as a tiny, tiny minority in largely Christian nations. And historically, Jews have also always lived in the Middle East as minorities in Muslim nations. So the psychology of somebody who is a majority group and a minority group is very different. And that leads to all the differences that translate into politics and society.
Right. Because, and to address the issue about the dynamics of the people in Israel. So like you said, a lot of the majority of the people in Israel are either from what was considered the British colony of Palestine, or they're from Arab nations nearby, like Egypt or what is now called Jordan or other places like that. But the Europeans that came in were from places where they couldn't assimilate, because you use a brilliant example about Frederick Mendelssohn. I think I'm saying his name right, the composer. Mm-hmm. And how he assimilated in German culture, his family. But there were the pogroms, which were basically race riots, for lack of a better term, toward Jewish people, anti-Semitic actions toward Jewish people. And they were primarily in places like Russia. And so the people that couldn't assimilate were the Europeans that moved into what we call the state of Israel now.
Let's repackage everything you just said in more simple terms.
Okay.
Half the people who live in Israel came from Eastern Europe and Central Europe, so Germany, Poland, Russia, and the other half came from the Middle East. So my wife's family is from Turkey and from Iraq. So Jews have always lived in the Middle East. There were Jews in Saudi Arabia. There were Jews in Iraq, Yemen, Iran for thousands of years. Okay. After World War II, the State of Israel was established in 1948, and everybody comes home from all of those different places. The main argument in our book is about the deal that was provided to Jews in Europe during the Enlightenment period in late 1800s, where Jews were offered the following deal, and that is, if you take off those funny hats, if you stop acting different than the rest of us, if you move out of your Jewish ghetto, you can become an equal citizen of the nation. So you can become a German, you can become a Frenchman, you can become a fully equal Dutch. And what the Jews in Central Europe did is they moved away from their religious communities and put their children, they attempted to basically replace their Jewish identity with national identity, right? And this is where the Reform Judaism movement came about. They kind of had to change Judaism in order to fit in with the majority group, Christian group that surrounded them. So this brought upon a new version of Judaism that's relatively new. It's only 200 years old, called Reform Judaism. And America offered Jews the same deal. So when Jews came to the United States, mostly early 1900s, they escaped from Russia. In the United States, look, as long as you act like everybody else, like an American, right? You drive on Saturday, you eat regular food, not just kosher food, you put your kids in regular schools, not Jewish schools, you can become as American as apple pie. And indeed, Jews in America are as American as apple pies. But in Europe, the assimilation and the attempt to just become ordinary citizens, it worked for about 100 years until the Holocaust and World War II, where it didn't work anymore. There's a huge backlash against the Jews. In the United States, it's still working, and this is why most American Jews are Reform Jews. Most American Jews place their American identity way above their Jewish identity, and this explains the main differences between the two tribes. In America, the Jewish identity is secondary. In Israel, it's primary.
So how does that shape our politics?
Great question. Question.
Yeah, because it's like you make the assertion that American Jews tend to be more liberal, but Israeli Jews tend to be more, where Israelis tend to be more conservative. Kind of talk about that.
Absolutely. So when you look at American Jews and their voting behavior, you will find that there is no constituency in the Democratic Party that is more loyal to the party than American Jews, with the exception of African Americans. When you look at, ever since the days of FDR, American Jews have always voted majority for the Democrats. So take the last couple of decades, from Bill Clinton and Al Gore, who received about 78 to 80% of the American Jewish vote, all the way now to President Biden, who received about 68 to 70% of the American Jewish vote. You can predict that American Jews, the overwhelming majority of them, 70 to 80% of them, are going to vote for the Democrats no matter what in every single election. So this is something that's very different than Israelis, who are much more religious, much more conservative, much more right-wing. And we have a chapter called Why Are American Jews Liberal, and then a chapter called Why Are Israelis Conservative.
So naturally, it seems, because I'm not a big fan of Netanyahu, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But one of the things I've noticed was that when Netanyahu was campaigning, he had pictures of him with Donald Trump, and didn't have any pictures of him with Joe Biden. Yet, when the October 7th happened, Joe Biden did something no other American president had ever done, and he literally flew to Israel to show physical and moral support for the state of Israel and basically what Netanyahu was going to have to do in response to that. And so that's kind of, for those of us in the United States, we see that, and we're seeing what's happening. You know, we're kind of like, well, we say that we're friends, but it doesn't look like Netanyahu is, and his party is showing reciprocity in that relationship. Am I reading that wrong? Are most Americans reading that wrong? How do you take that?
Because you're saying because Netanyahu is friends with Trump? Well, basically, Netanyahu's political orientation is on the right, and Donald Trump is on the right. So naturally, they're friends. The question you raised is what most American Jews don't understand either. They're like, hey, we're Democrats, and Joe Biden has been the most pro-Israel president in recent years. I mean, he is a self-claimed Zionist, right? So President Biden has been a great friend to the state of Israel. And why is Netanyahu buddy-buddy with Donald Trump? But I want to give you, Eric, the opposite view from the Trump perspective, because Trump has made a lot of very controversial remarks recently, right? He said any American Jew who votes for the Democrats must be insane, right? Do you remember when he said that?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Jews? Yeah, so American Jews were shocked by this statement. Donald Trump is looking from his perspective, and he says, look, I was one of the most pro-Israeli U.S. presidents in history. Look at what Donald Trump has done for Israel. Okay, he brought the Abraham Accords, which brought peace between the UAE, Bahrain, and the State of Israel. So he's normalizing relationships between the Arab countries and the State of Israel. He moved the embassy of the United States from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He recognized the Golan Heights, and he's given Israel full political support on the international front. And yet, most American Jews are not voting for Trump. They're voting for the Democrats. And Trump just cannot understand why it is. But the answer, we have this in our book, the answer is American Jews do not vote based on Israel. American Jews vote based on their identity as Democrats. And American Jews are some of the most progressive voters out there. On every single social justice issue, you will find American Jews at the forefront of it. So because Israeli Jews and American Jews have such a different political psychology, this is what brings attention politically here between the Jewish people, and it reflects amongst the two large American political parties.
Yeah, so let me ask this question. Because I said I was going to deal with it. I because I guess it's been more of a philosophical deal. My biggest issue with Netanyahu is the issue about this two-state solution. He is totally opposed to that. And I'm of the political position that if you want to increase peace in that region, that's the least you can do is recognize the Palestinians in the West Bank and I guess what's left of Gaza now, to be able to have their own state and their own government and be recognized as such, and develop some kind of trade relations or whatever, since the countries would be basically interconnected. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I'm a little concerned about is the escalation. Right. So I think that Netanyahu is escalating the situation for two reasons. One, I think as far as American politics goes, he doesn't want to see a continuation of the Biden philosophy in Vice President Harris getting elected. And he's trying to protect himself from legal ramifications. Just like we assert that Donald Trump is trying to get elected so all his legal woes will go away. We feel that Netanyahu, being a wartime president, is trying to do the same thing. Do you agree with that assessment or what?
Well, you threw a lot at me right now, Eric. Let's try to deconstruct each one of those things. Okay, look, it's really interesting, the theories about the use of trying to avoid legal issues and what people do. It's very interesting because the claim against Donald Trump that everything he's doing is try to escape legal ramification. You hear the same comments on the right. People are saying everything Joe Biden is doing is to protect Hunter and his legal issues. And the same for Netanyahu. I'll tell you one thing. You were talking about the two-state solution. 20 years ago, Israel tried to make peace with the Palestinians. We had the Oslo Accords and many other versions of the Oslo Accords later on. In 2005, for example, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon withdrew every single Jewish settler from Gaza. So Israeli soldiers and Israeli military, I was there in Israel during that time, came to homes of 100,000 Jews and kicked them out of their own homes and basically removed them physically. The Israeli government removed Jews from their homes and moved them out of Gaza. And Israel hoped that the Palestinians will have their own clean land and in Gaza and establish a Palestinian state. And the hopes from the optimists was this will be the Singapore of the Middle East. 6 months, and the Bush administration, George W. Bush, supported this entirely. 6 months later, there was democratic elections in Gaza, and guess what? The people elected Hamas, and the Hamas military threw the Palestinian Authority soldiers off the roof and killed them. Ever since that time, 2005 until now, Gaza was nothing but a terror base. They took all the international money they received, hundreds of millions of dollars, and instead of building hospitals and roads and schools, they built weapons and underground tunnels. Even the most optimistic people who believed in this two-state solution, there are none left. After October 7th, after the Palestinians went in from Gaza and killed over 1,000 civilians and mass raped hundreds of teenage girls and did some of the most atrocious things and took hundreds of people, civilians, women and children, as hostages and put them underground till today. There are still hostages underground. There is not a single serious political person in Israel who still believes in the two-state solution. So there is nobody in the Palestinian side who still believes in the two-state solution. After what Israel did to the Palestinians in Gaza, there is not a single person who's serious on the Israeli side who still believes in two-state solution. A two-state solution is something that people in the West believe in because they don't understand how small Israel really is. You have to understand, Eric, the distance between Arab towns and Israeli towns in the West Bank and in Gaza, or not in Gaza, but in the West Bank, we literally are talking about the distance between Washington, D.C. and across Arlington, Virginia, right? Or between New York City and Jersey City. We're talking about 1, 2, 3 miles away. The two people don't want to live in peace. I mean, Israel hoped to live in peace, but there is a strong, I'm sure there are Palestinians who want to live in peace, but there is a strong culture of resistance, and the language of resistance is taught in their schools. Every Palestinian child who grew up in the last 20 years in the West Bank or in Gaza heard about the martyrs who gave up their lives for the cause of resistance, the cause of kicking the Jews out of Israel, all of it, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, every part of Israel. I don't blame them. I'm not saying that they have no just reason to be angry at the Jewish people, right? This is a very complex conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians. On the other hand, I don't support their outcome, which is, viewing terrorism as a solution. This is complicated stuff, and people in the West, are like, oh, let's just separate them and live in peace. It's much more complicated. We've been trying for 25 years, ever since the Oslo Accords. Nobody's ever succeeded in this.
Yeah. And, and I greatly appreciate your perspective on it, because not only is that, part of your personal story, but you're an academic. And so you've studied and researched this. This is not just some theory. I'm not an authority on the Middle East. I am a citizen who is watching the news and trying to get as many viewpoints as I can. But being somebody that's had to make decisions on public policy in my life, I have developed positions. So it's good to hear your viewpoint on it. But I want to ask you this question, because one of the things that we do have a problem with as non-Jewish people is that if we see something that we don't like in Israel, and we use a platform like my podcast or give a speech or whatever, the biggest fear is that if we say something, the ADL is going to come and say you're anti-Semitic. So my question is, the concept of Zionism was for Israelis to have their own land, Jewish people to be in their homeland. And like you said in the book, and history dictates that this started way before World War II. This started, like you said, in the 1800s. So, but when people say, when they look at the current government and they are not approving of actions that the current government is doing, and they say, well, that's Zionism. That's Israel's trying to protect their land at all costs and all this stuff. Is that considered anti-Semitic to be critical of what the Israeli government is doing? Because a lot of us feel like that's going to be the backlash if we say something.
No, Eric, there is nobody more critical than the Israeli government and Netanyahu than American Jews. Nobody. You will not find anybody more critical of the Netanyahu government than American Jews. Again, American Jews are on the left, many of them are on the far left, and Israelis are on the right. Look, it's okay to be critical of Israel. I'll tell you what's not okay. What's not okay, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the general dialogue. If people are having an honest debate using facts, right? That's absolutely okay. I mean, my number one criticism of universities is that universities are no longer a place where a marketplace of ideas exists. Okay? So anybody who has any criticism of Israel, I'm open to speak to them and we can have a conversation. What is anti-Semitism? Is when people are completely using lies. I'll give you an example, okay? Right now on college campuses, you have students who are saying that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians and that Israel had no business, the Jews had no business being in Israel in the first place, and that Zionism is racism and all that junk. I mean, there is a real difference between having an honest conversation and debate on the issues based on facts and the fact that people are making up lies. I want to ask you a question, Eric. Everybody who says Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, okay? In the last 50 years, the population of the Palestinian people has grown in a meaningful way. In the last 20 years, the population of Palestinians has grown in a meaningful way, and in the last 10 years, the same phenomenon happened. If a government is engaged in genocide, how could it be that a population is going up in a rapid pace? On the other hand, I'll give you an example. In Syria, the Assad regime, right, the Shiites in Syria murdered 500,000 Sunnis. Have you seen any outcry on college campuses? Have you heard anybody from the UN stand up and say this is wrong? Have you seen college professors who teach their students that Shiites are all racist because they're engaged in ethnic cleansing in Syria or in Yemen or in the Sudan? Because guess what? In Yemen, 250,000 people died in the last 10 years from war between Sunnis and Shiites, and there were over 1 million people displaced. In Sudan, 500,000 people died in wars between Muslims, and millions of people were displaced. In Syria, 500,000 people died, and the Shiites kicked the Sunnis out of Syria. They ethnic cleansed their country. I didn't hear a single academic speak about that. I didn't hear any of the social justice activists protest on campuses. Did you? I didn't.
No.
Eric, here's a question. And you ask, when is it anti-Semitic? The answer is when you use one ruler of morality for everybody and a different ruler of morality based on, oftentimes, on inaccurate information for the Jews. That's when you can point and say, this is not fair.
Yeah, and I feel you on that. My answer to that question would be that Islamophobia is even more prevalent than anti-Semitism because, well, I'd say because of the fact that we don't pay attention to what's going on in Muslim countries. We pay attention to what happens in Israel. We have a vested interest in Israel being, as far as U.S. policy is concerned, We have a vested interest.
Eric, let me pause you for a second. You said Islamophobia is more prevalent in the United States than anti-Semitism. Is there a single Muslim student who couldn't walk on a U.S. campus, right, without being harassed, without the university protecting him or her in the last 10 years? No. But Jewish students were not allowed to enter the campuses of Columbia University, of UCLA, of University of Pennsylvania because they're Jews. I mean, it's not even close. There is no institutional Islamophobia in the United States. If there is, prove it to me.
Well, I'll just say this. I know that there have been people of the Muslim faith, when you have a president of the United States say, I don't want anybody from Muslim countries coming to the United States, that's the bully pulpit of the United States promoting Islamophobia. And I'm not trying to create a pissing contest between who's more racist and who's more victim, because I'm a black man in America. So I've got an opinion about that. But what I am saying is that the news doesn't cover what happens in the Sudan. The news doesn't cover what happens in Syria, not unless there are U.S. interests there. They do cover what happens in Israel because there's more of a favorable viewpoint as far as making sure that we cover what's going on in that part of the world as compared to other parts. And that'll lead to a whole nother long show, Doc. As far as where we're going to go with it.
But this is, you're exactly making the point. The point is that when 500,000 civilians die in Syria, nobody cares. When 500,000 people die in Sudan, nobody cares. When there was an African civil war where 10 million people died in the Democratic Republic of Congo and around Rwanda, right? Nobody cared. No Jews, no news. Now, it's not like the news coverage is favorable. The news coverage of Israel is completely anti-Israel. If you look at the BBC, if you look at CNN, you look at the New York Times, it is not pro-Israel in any way, shape, or form. Again, when a democratic country is trying to fight a terror organization who uses civilians as human shields, 40,000 people died in this terrible war in Gaza. Israel is getting the brunt of negative media coverage. And when 500,000 Sunnis are slaughtered by the Syrian regime, nobody cares, nobody covers. No Jews, no news.
Right. And, like I said, it was the same situation in Iraq when Saddam was in power. That was the big civil war. We ended up, I think, giving weapons to Saddam to do whatever he wanted to do. And then we came back and got him out. So, when it comes to foreign policy with the United States, it's very, very convoluted. And and it's not really, something that I really favor one way to, I don't like genocide in any form, shape, or fashion. I do have a strong opinion about the way that things have gone on. I think when I talked to the Consul General, the answer she gave me was that they wanted to make sure that Hamas was no longer a threat, right? I get that. Mm-hmm. And so, what I see going on now in Lebanon falls under that same category. They don't want Hezbollah to be a threat to the people that live in the northern part of Israel. I get that. Mm-hmm. War is war, and people strategize, and war is not supposed to be pretty. However, again, like I said, that can be a long thing. I really wanted you on, and I'm glad that you have these strong opinions, because people need to hear folks that have strong, educated opinions about this issue. And I would defer to you more than just rely on me, because you are Israeli by birth. And so and this is part of your study. You do a whole lot of stuff. You're a political science professor. You do a whole lot of stuff. I've seen you written articles about AI and all that stuff. But I really am am glad that you came on to talk about that, and also to talk about your book, and to kind of give an understanding that there is a different mindset between Jewish people here in the United States as opposed to Jewish people that actually live in Israel. And I think that's very important. So let's do this, because we don't have any more time. How can people get your book? How can people reach out to you to further this conversation?
Well, first of all, Eric, I appreciate the opportunity and I enjoyed the conversation. Anybody who wants to reach out, check out GuyGoTV.com. Again, that's GuyGoTV.com. You can see all of my social media links and get access to the book on Amazon. Well,
Professor Guy Golan, it's an honor to meet you finally. And I would like you to come back on the show anytime you want to. Anytime you're a guest, you have an open invitation to come back. Because we, as you can, and the listeners can tell, we really kind of scratched the surface a little bit about a lot of things that need to be out there. I think that the more people are informed, the better they can make decisions about, how they can stand, and they can better articulate to their elected officials what they think should be done. So I appreciate the fact that you're a teacher, first of all, and that you're out trying to educate young people. And then I really appreciate that you've written this book. And again, the name of the book is My Brother's Keeper: The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. And finally, I greatly appreciate you coming on this podcast, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. So I want to thank Guy Golan, Professor Golan, for coming on to talk about his book, My Brother's Keeper, and to give a perspective about what's going on over there, and really explain that there is a difference between American Jews, or the Jewish American community, and Israelis. There's a difference. And hopefully that's helpful for people to understand the dynamics. It definitely opened my eyes a little bit on some things. So, but as you understood, I have certain opinions about that. And I don't want to really press the professor on this particular interview, but he's agreed to come back, and we'll go further into it. But I thank him for coming on. But that's not really what I want to vent about. So I watched the vice presidential debate, and you've heard, if you listen to the pod, you've heard the takes and all that stuff. By the time this comes out, it'll be almost a week from the debate. And in one sense, it was kind of refreshing to see two grown adults having a civil discussion about their differences. I think Tim Walz was restrained, and I think J.D. Vance was putting on his best face, right? In other words, neither one of them was in attack dog mode, like they are on the stump. They were very cordial to each other. Totally different vibe than when Vice President Harris and Donald Trump were on the stage. Because, J.D. Vance at least had enough common sense to understand, hey, I got a negative favorability rating out here. Let me try to get these American people to like me just a little bit more, right? And Tim Walz was trying to sound like he was ready to rise to the occasion. And so they came across a little different than what people have been used to seeing them. But I enjoy a civil discourse, and that's what we've tried to do on this podcast. Unlike what you've experienced on any other medium. But having said that, right, because by Thursday, everybody was, 2 days after the debate, everybody was back in their respective corners doing what they do. But my commentary is not so much them as it is, because that was actually a refreshing break from what I see on social media and, other shows. It's just, I get why people are turned off by all this. And, early voting has started already in almost half of the country. And people were voting even before the vice presidential debate took place. And probably in another couple of weeks, every state that has early voting will probably be voting. But I don't know if it's me. I'm pretty sure it's not just me. But I just think that it's really, the level of crazy has really, really ratcheted up. I think people are just really out there, and social media is great. I'm glad people have an outlet to utilize their First Amendment rights. But sane people have a First Amendment right too. And speaking on behalf of this sane person, I just really am shocked at the level of craziness that is out there. It's like everybody is just, and the reason why I say crazy, and that may not be a politically correct word now, and everybody's entitled to their opinion to the level of education that they have, right? And when I say education, I'm not just talking about formal, I'm talking about where you get your information from. But if you look at some of these people, because I'm into history, you look at some of the posts that these people posted before the election really kicked in, my God, it's like the last thing you would think is that they had such a strong opinion about politics. But, I'm just looking at some of these folks and how the fascinating thing is how they process information and then regurgitate it out. It's insane out there, y'all. And so what I ask people to do, what I'm really, really encouraging people to do is to, If you really want to make an informed decision, and you're not making a decision by emotion, or you're not making a decision out of knee-jerk reaction, right? I need you to really, really pay attention to as many sources as you can. If you really are an independent, I want you to watch Fox and MSNBC, as well as, CNN, and listen to this podcast and listen to other podcasts and really do some research. Because, if you go vote, if there's no long line, it's only going to take you about 5-10 minutes based on how many names and issues are on the ballot to actually go vote. Once you get to that machine, it's not going to take you long. If you know what's going on. And I mean, really, really pay attention and really understand certain basic things. A college student is now viral because he basically reminded people the vice president can only do so much. But if you let other people tell it, the vice president is supposed to be running the show. These are the people that are just, and I know a lot of these people are just doing it, just talking trash, right? It's kind of like a sporting event where, it's like you're going to say something crazy about the other team, knowing good and well that ain't true or whatever, but you just trying to get under the skin of the person that's supporting the team that you are not supporting. And that's basically what it is. It's not anything factual. It's not anything logical. Just so you can pick on somebody. Right? But the scary thing is that people are taking that information and acting like it's the gospel. And it's not. It's not even close. Now, we can both sides that if you want to, that's fine. I'm saying there are some crazy people out here that have like thousands of followers. Let's just say somebody's got 70,000 followers and then they throw out something crazy and they get like 800,000 views. Now, I do want to hope and believe that the majority of those people don't agree with that person's position, but somebody told them, hey, bro, you got to listen to this. This is crazy. And they click on it, right? That's what I'm hoping. But there are actually people who are taking what these people say as gospel. Now, what makes your opinion, Eric, more than anything else? I don't know. Maybe because I actually campaigned for an office, that I actually served in an office, that I actually understood that when I was taking an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Mississippi, that I needed to have some familiarity with the documents, right? I personally visited every state agency that the state of Mississippi had, so I can make educated votes when it came to appropriations, right? And this is something that I have been doing for a long time, before and after I've been elected. I've been a lobbyist, right? So my perspective is a little different than somebody that, say, tries to determine whether they're going to have a significant other based on their astrology, right? Or I'm an R&B singer and now I want to fight for reparations. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, it's really, really crazy. And I'm not saying that human beings can't engage in the process. That's what we want, people to engage in the process. But I don't know. I just think that people who, it's one thing to be a fan of a sports team. It's another thing to be the coach or the player. Let me break it down like that. Because even if you played high school or college football, if you didn't play at the pro level, it's a little different, But I would value somebody that at least played organized sports, in their opinion, especially if they at least got to the college level, over mine, because I didn't play sports at the college level, right? I would have to take their word for it. As a fan of the team, I'm not happy when they lose, and I'm ecstatic when they win. But that doesn't make me an expert, right? And I think that's the same thing with politics. Whether you agree with the person or not, if you're not on that level, and then when you talk to people at that level, you want people that take the job seriously, right? Not these folks. That's my biggest criticism about a lot of these folks out here now, that they don't understand the seriousness of what they do. They don't understand the repercussions of the words that they say or the decisions that they make. They're just following a script and trying to be popular, And, from what I remember about being, people wanting to be homecoming king or class president or whatever, there's a certain level of popularity that's inane, right? It's something natural. It's not something they created. It's just they had that charisma to get those positions. But that's not what real politics is supposed to be about. Real politics is supposed to be about people coming to the masses and saying, I want to serve in this position because I believe we can do better. Here's my vision of what doing better is. Right? Not fear-mongering, not saying batshit crazy things. Really appealing to people's intelligence rather than their emotion, right? Now, if you're a good orator, people are going to feel good when they hear you talk. It's a natural reaction. If you're funny, people are going to laugh, right? But they also want substance. They want to know that when you get to the job, I literally had somebody tell me when I made a mistake, I don't think you're serious for the job. And then I got reelected, and next thing you know, they were asking me for help, right? I guess they figured out I was serious. But I'm just really, really amazed how crazy people are and how gullible we are to listening to craziness rather than reason. Especially in our community. I think we have a legitimate right to be frustrated. I'm talking about black folks. I think we have a legitimate right to be frustrated about the process. But we fought to be a part of this process. And so if your idea and your frustration is to not engage in the process anymore, good luck in seeing how that's going to work out. You vent your frustration by picking people that you believe, because we have to go on what they say and what they offer. To lead. Now, if you follow Dr. Malveau's suggestion in the early 1990s, late 80s even, and put your money up to create your own political party, you have a lot of money right now to have a say-so in this election. But since you didn't do that, you didn't feel the need, you weren't sophisticated enough to make that happen, now you're saying, well, I don't have a voice. No, you got a voice. You can vote. Now, I know who I'm voting for, and that's not a secret. And it's not a secret where my allegiance is. And I'm not trying to discourage people from voting for other folks. What I am saying is that make it an informed decision. Don't base it off somebody that just decided to get on TikTok and entertain you. Because this is not about entertainment. The people that get elected based on your vote are going to be making decisions about your life, right? How much taxes you're going to pay or not going to pay. Whether books will be banned at your child's school or not be banned. Whether they're going to put windows in their bathrooms or not put windows in their bathrooms. Yes, that's actually happening. Whether people can walk in and shoot up a classroom or whether they won't have access to those kind of weapons. All that stuff is being decided, right? Whether you're going to have total reproductive health care or not in your state. That's going to be decided. Who are going to be the judges presiding over cases in your community? You get to decide that. Who's going to be the district attorney prosecuting the cases? You decide that. You decide who sits on boards of education and at universities in some jurisdictions. You get to decide that. It's not just the president, right? You determine who is going to be in Congress with that president, at least for the first 2 years. Who's going to be in the U.S. Senate in at least 36 states, right? There's going to be some work involved in your research, but you need to do it. But it's not about entertainment. You know, I think the media as a whole wants the election to be close for entertainment reasons, for Nielsen ratings or whatever rating systems they use now. It's not about whether that person's qualified or not, or whether that person is serious or not. It's about entertainment value. Well, if I interview this guy, people are going to watch my channel. It is what it is. But it's wrong. It's wrong to do politics that way. Politics, to be honest, is supposed to be somewhat boring. It's supposed to be a challenge to your intellect. not tickle your funny bone, right? If this was a normal election, somebody that got on the national stage and said people are eating cats and dogs would be laughed off of a stage, let's be honest. But that person has a 50-50 shot of being the actual president of the United States again. At some point, ladies and gentlemen, we got to take this serious. Especially black folks. We got to take this serious. And when people are making a big deal about the vice president, whether she's black or not, you know, I've been on this planet long enough and I've voted long enough to know that most of the options I've had to vote for have not been black, especially at that position. And we had to make a decision which white man we were going to vote for. Right? Who made sense? And when you talk to people of my parents' generation, or even my grandparents' generation, when they talked about politics, it was like, well, they talking about doing X, Y, and Z. These folks are talking about keeping us down. I'm not voting for the people that's going to keep us down. If you were in the North, maybe it was the Republicans. You're in the South, it was the Democrats in their generation. To me, it's pretty clear that the roles are reversed, but there's some people playing games with it. Just be glad that our politics is not determined Harriet Tubman style. If you don't know about Harriet Tubman and how she dealt with slaves that at the last minute decided not to run away, you need to study that. And be thankful that that's not how we do with folks who don't work in our best interest. I'm not here to be entertained when it comes to politics. I'm not trying to entertain you when I have these guests on. I'm trying to get you to make a informed decision. Even if I don't agree with the person that I'm interviewing, that's not my job, per se. My job is to get that person in front of you so you can make an intelligent decision. If you end up agreeing with that person and disagreeing with me, so be it. My job is to get that person before you to make their case, to answer tough questions or honest questions. More or less is to enlighten you that there are people out here that are not running for office that are doing the work, doing the research, so that in the sphere that they are in, they're making an impact, they're making a difference. And hopefully that you will elect people that will help them continue to make a difference. Right? So let's not have craziness and entertainment value determine who our leaders are. Black folks, we don't have that luxury. If an entertainer endorses somebody, they have that right. That's not what I'm talking about. Because the funny thing is the people who actually entertain, the singers, the comedians, the dancers, the actors, they're taking it more seriously than the people who call themselves trying to educate us. And they're clowns. I'm just saying. You know, I'm not talking about people who are passionate about what they're doing. I'm talking about clowns. People that ain't got no clue what they're talking about, and they don't care. They're reckless with it. And for those of us of the Christian faith, we understand about division and where the root cause of that is. And what the ultimate objective is. Right? We understand that. For those of you who are not of the Christian faith or not of any faith at all, understand that there's an element that is out there that wants people to be confused and people to be misinformed for whatever their motivation is. And it's not for the good of society. It's for their own selfish interest. And that really, really has to change if we're really going to make a difference, especially in the Black community. So anyway, I'm gonna end it there. Again, as I stated earlier in the program, if you want to help people that are dealing with the after effects of Hurricane Helene, go to FEMA.gov. Find out what you can do and who you can give to safely. Look out for each other. Be mindful of the information you're getting. Do your research. And please, please, please go out and vote. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.